I'll keep my orders. Good? Okay. Great. So wonderful. Thank you all again for coming to the second lecture in Professor Ed Garcia's, the series that we're doing. And I know there's some, and also welcome to those. I know people signed in online, probably from the Philippines as well. So welcome to them. I'm James Robson, the director of the Harvard Asia Center. And I won't give another introduction to Professor Garcia, which I gave last time. And I know many of you have already heard that. I think the short form of it is, as we're getting to hear, his life story is woven into the history of the modern Philippines anyway. So we're getting to see that in live time and hearing actually his own personal reflections about many of the key events that have happened in the run-up to the last time that what we heard of the framing of the Philippine Constitution in 1987, and then we'll pick up the story from that today. And today's lecture is entitled "That Waging Peace Requires a Marathon Mentality." And then just to remind everybody, on Friday will be the final lecture, which is entitled "Reinventing Resistance." And then for those of you who will be around on the weekend as well, that'll be at 2 o'clock in this room. We'll be doing a book launch for 6 Filipino Women for Justice, which is this collection of profiles of some of the major female political leaders, activists, and thinkers in the Philippines today. And so that should be a really a wonderful event, and also a nice way to kind of culminate this week of Professor Garcia's visit. So Ed, I will turn oh, hi there. Good to see you again, yeah. So Ed, I will turn the microphone over to you, and we'll just launch into it, and then we'll have some time for discussion at the end after his lecture today. So please join me in welcoming Professor Garcia again. Yeah, thank you, Ed. Yeah.
Good afternoon to all of us here. I'm really privileged and delighted that we're able to come together and discuss, converse about major events that took place in the Philippines. And what I'd like to do now is to summarize, maybe in 3 slides, summarize the first lecture, what we did during the first lecture. First of all, we tackled the first quarter storm. So this was a social unrest that took place in 1970 during the first quarter of the year. The students coming out demanding a non-partisan constitutional assembly, a non-partisan constitutional convention, and then being met with truncheons at the old Congress. And then it escalated into the Battle of Mendiola when we tried to enter the gates of Malacanang, and then were met by truncheons and bullets. And then later on, for me at least, the becoming an accidental activist. Because during our meeting on February 17th, 1970, we were saying, how do we deal with the situation? Because those of you who can remember or have read, the majority of students at that time were saying the response to the repression that is taking place is armed struggle. So those of us who did not believe in this path, we said no. We should try to form a movement that was dedicated to ahimsa and satyagraha, which were Gandhian principles, because we said it is time for such a movement in this country. So Lakas Diwa was formed, but I was in this room, something similar, although it was not an amphitheater, at the Loyola House of Studies. I was a seminarian then. And Ed Jop, who was seated beside me, Edgar Hobson, I said to him, Ed Jop, ikaw na. You take over. You become the leader of this new organization, which happened to be the date of that gathering was February 17th, 1970. That's significant because of Gombursa, Gomez Burgos Zamora. That's the anniversary of our martyr priests who were killed in 1872 and in a sense ignited the desire of people to advance the struggle for independence in the Philippines. So it was important that the gathering of young people who were looking for another way out, a response, to the situation in the country. So this was taking place at that time as an alternative for young people who wanted to pursue the struggle, but in a non-violent manner. However, the martial law was declared on September 21, 1972. And after that, obviously, for the next 14 years, a repressive kind of regime took over our lives. And for many years, I told a story on Monday about Manny Yap, about Evilio Javier. I just found out that you got to know the son of Evilio here in Harvard, Gideon also, and so it took it took the assassination of Ninoy Aquino in 1983, August 21, to really bring out the rage of our people. Tama na, sobra na, palitan na. Okay, stop, enough, change. And so this was a key moment, the assassination of Ninoy Aquino, and then the other leaders, who came together, like Pepe Diokno, Jose Diokno, defined courage in the time of martial law. Lorenzo Tañada, Jovito Salonga, there were leaders, the collective courage of these leaders that inspired us to continue the efforts to bring about the kind of changes we desired. So people power took place in 86. I will not summarize the stories that we exchanged, during that period. And then finally, when the dictator fled, some of us were asked to help in the drafting of the new Philippine Constitution. I brought a copy of me with the original. Maybe I'll bring it again on Saturday for those of you who wish to look at an original copy of the Philippine Constitution. And then the question remains, okay, why are we still where we are? So I tried to answer that question because there are people in the House of Representatives in the Philippines who say, change the Constitution. So I would like to address them and say, the Constitution is not the problem. It is part of the solution. Where does the problem lie? What are the flaws that we can identify? So I say, the institutions are flawed, the policies are not fit for purpose, and the leaders are not the kind of leaders our people need at this time. And then finally, so we ended the first session on Monday. Those of you who remember, never forget. We said, never forget. Why should we never forget? Because there are heroes in our time who sacrificed their lives. And secondly, why should we never forget? Because there are people who remain vulnerable in our society today because of the poverty, because of the inequality, because of the politics of exclusion. People continue to suffer. And that's why we need to our collective efforts to bring about the kind of changes required in our country, in the Philippines, must be pursued. So, in a sense, that is my short summary of the lecture we had on day one. Did I miss anything? All right. So, this lecture should have been on Monday, Boston Marathon. We did not plan this, or maybe James did. Yesterday we said it was either serendipity or perfect planning, because on Monday it was not only Patriots Day, it was also Boston Marathon Day. Did anybody here run the marathon? Or did anybody here have friends among the marathon runners? Anybody? You had friends, and how did they feel after 26, or how many kilometers? 42? Exactly.
Just say they feel tired. You say they are tired, but they never really say that. But you feel they feel so accomplished. They get so satisfied about it.
So that's
Just say tired.
that sense of achievement of I was also an accidental marathon runner in the Philippines, because I had students who run the marathon, and I said I can only do half. But running the marathon is an exhilarating experience. Running the marathon, although you're really, really tired, especially when you go up the Heartbreak Hill. Most marathons have Heartbreak Hills. And, the lactic acid begins to, you really feel tired. But then you've got to say to yourself, look, you're in it already, you've got to finish. And so I use this imagery. In college, we used to run the cross country, and for me, this was quite an experience. And so I've worked for 45 years or so on the peace processes, not only in the Philippines, but in other parts of the world as well. And I know for a fact that we need a marathon mentality, especially in our country, which, I will show later on, that the communist armed struggle in the Philippines is the world's longest armed struggle involving communists. Do you realize that? We've been at it for over half a century. Before Colombia shared that distinction because of Manuel Marulanda, the guerrilla leader of the Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia, But now that Colombia has forged a kind of peace, especially with the Truth Commission, we remain the only laggard. We remain the only country that's still battling, a communist revolution. So that's why I say the marathon mentality is very much needed, in our time. For this conversation, I have chosen a few lines from Tennyson's Ulysses. Though much is taken, much abides, and though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are one equal temper of hearts, made weak by time and faith, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. So, let me give you a brief summary of the whole discussion for tonight with the following slides. You know, my own path to peace, you know, perhaps started, as I said earlier, in Lakas Diwa, you know, that movement for non-violent struggle. In fact, I was volunteered. I was volunteered by other people because I was then a seminarian. And ang sabi nga ni Ed Job sa akin, "O Ed, seminarista ka naman eh. Wala kayong ginagawa." I'm sorry, the translation is, "Ed, you're a seminarian, you're probably not doing too much." We were doing theology actually at that time, and I felt completely unprepared. You know, I was not ready. I never took courses in political science or sociology until much later, and so, you know, I said to myself, it was important to prepare. And so, in one meeting of the College Editors Guild of the Philippines in Cebu, I was invited to speak together with Ninoy Aquino, and Ninoy Aquino sat me down and he said to me, because he knew I was going to do my theology abroad, I was choosing between India to study in Darjeeling or to study in Latin America. And he said to me, "Ed, you've got to go to Latin America. So many things are happening there. The kinds of social movements, the kind of revolutionary movements. We've got to learn from them because we've got similar situations, conditions, and maybe we can pick up a lesson or two." So those are the last words I remember hearing from Ninoy Aquino. And that was in Cebu before I left for Latin America. And you know, those of you who have heard Ninoy speak, he's a very convincing, Ninoy Aquino is a very convincing person, both in conversation and also when he speaks before huge crowds. And so from Latin America, I actually studied formally peace studies in the Blindern campus in Oslo, Norway, together with the Peace Research International, PRIO, and in Uppsala in Sweden. So I consider those years of study, formal studies in peace work, quite important. And finally, I went back. So I went back to the University of the Philippines in 1981 from my studies in Latin America. And at the University of the Philippines, I was working with Randy David at the Third World Study Center, and also with Dodong Nemenso in the Political Science Department. And when International Alert came and said, "Would like to have one of you, seconded to International Alert in London," he said, "Only for 2 years." But you know what happened? Those 2 years became 20. So the 2 years that I was being asked to spend with International Alert in London, and they said, "You're the only Filipino in our organization, and it's important to have more diversity." So I was asked, to stay longer. So I actually missed my, teaching years. I really enjoyed teaching at the University of the Philippines, but it was cut short because of this assignment, being seconded. And so therefore, what took place, at least for me in my journey. So I had to prepare to engage, to accompany the peace advocates in different parts of the globe, and then to help catalyze the social movements or citizens groups or citizens alliances or coalitions who would work for peace. And I will explain later on why this is very important, because often people think when you speak of peace processes, it's negotiations across the negotiating table between government and guerrillas. But my experience tells me that the most effective path to peace is when citizens, when people get involved. So, you know, I keep a diary. I think most of you do. I keep a diary about the things that I am engaged in. So when I teach, in fact, you know, at the later part of my life when I already retired, I was asked by a former student of mine to be a life coach for scholar athletes playing basketball, volleyball, and football, soccer. And I kept a diary, you know, even then. So after every game, I would write my reflections on the game, and they became one of the first volumes was Dugout Diaries. These are basketball games. So my reflections on basketball, and then the other one was Volleyball is Life. In other words, another, you know, kind of writings about the game of volleyball. So I had a diary about all the work I did, you know, in different parts of the globe, because I became part of International Alert, and they were working in different areas, and I happened to be a special peace envoy, so I was being sent to different areas to accompany not only alert teams, but to accompany the peace advocates in those countries. So I just wanted to summarize first, and later on I will discuss a few of the countries. So in Asia, I worked in Sri Lanka, in Nepal, Indonesia. In Africa, I worked in Rwanda, Burundi, Sierra Leone, and South Africa. And this when I worked in South Africa, Nelson Mandela was still under house arrest. Yeah. And then in Latin America, I worked in Colombia. In the Middle East, as I told James before, it was, you know, the work with Israel, Palestine was so humbling, because, you know, you always faced a blank wall, and I'll explain later, you know, the experiences. And then the Philippines, of course. So that in a sense summarizes the approach to these countries. And then this is a summary of the lessons I learned, which I will then be discussing in the course of this lecture. Number one is people. Meterle pueblo al proceso. To put people at the heart of the process. That was for me one of the biggest lessons I learned in life, and it came from my experience in Colombia. The second one is if you own the process, you will trust the outcome. In other words, it's important to have a process where people are involved. Then they will trust the outcome. They'll be ready to make sacrifices. They cannot be surprised. No, they have to be part of it. Then the third lesson that's very important, and I want to share with you later especially, is you have to restore broken relationships. Peace is about relationships. You know, in Sri Lanka, between Sinhalese and Tamils, in Burundi and Rwanda, it's Hutus and Tutsis. So in other words, it's relationships of communities, of individuals. And then the fourth one is agreements. When you forge a peace agreement, you think it's done. No. The peace agreement is not the final destination. It is the beginning of the more important part. So in other words, the peace agreement launches you into uncharted territory. It needs a lot of commitment and imagination. The fifth, I already mentioned to you the importance of the marathon mentality. And then hope. Why is hope very important? You cannot engage in peace processes unless you have hope. And as a Danish philosopher once said, hope is the passion for the possible. In other words, to believe in the possibilities of things. Does anybody remember who said that? The Danish philosopher? Exactly, Søren Kierkegaard. And he said, hope is the passion for the possible. And then finally, courage. For me, this is something I value very much. In fact, when I was working with scholar athletes, there was one phrase that I told them they must always remember: on court and outside the court, on the pitch and outside the pitch, be brave. Be brave. And courage is something you must be able to demonstrate, while working with the different conflict parties. Courage. I want to tell you a very brief story. You're all familiar with Oxford graduations, or in Oxford, they have this Oxford Union, and very often they invite distinguished speakers. And so one time, they invited Sir Winston Churchill to speak before the graduating class. And you know what happened? He gave perhaps the shortest graduation speech ever. What did he say? So he stood up like this with a cigar. Never give up. Never. And that's it. And that's it, So, when I heard the story, I said to myself, my God, this really is the kind of spirit. You don't have to have a long spiel. You don't have to have more words, It's probably his life, embodied, never giving up. So anyway, that's my summary for those 3 slides. Really summarize what we're supposed to be doing tonight. So I can sit down and that's it. All right, so let me start with Asia, the work in Asia, because slowly we will be able to put together the lessons that I pointed out from the examples, from the experiences that I will share with you. Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka was one of the most intractable experiences I actually I consider my work in Sri Lanka a failure. But defeat sometimes is a better teacher than victory. And so that's why I am not afraid, I am not shy to say to you, I failed, okay? It was so difficult, one, to link peace process and human rights because there were continuous violations. And number two, because of intransigent religious leadership, especially among the Buddhist monks, it was really, really difficult. So what did we do? We invited the legendary Mahagoshananda. Does anybody remember what he did? Mahagoshananda, a Buddhist Theravada. He was the leader during the genocide in Cambodia. And he initiated peace marches across the country. Peace marches during the time of the genocide, the Khmer Rouge. And so I said to him, I have the pictures in the photo story that you have in the Asia Center website with Mahagoshananda. And he was telling us, we just have to sit down with the monks, even if they do not agree. You have to have patience. So, he accompanied us. We sat down with the Buddhist monks until, slowly, some of them became more engaged. But, creating that breakthrough was really difficult. And without Mahagoshananda's assistance, his support, his example, it would have been much worse. Because Sri Lanka did not end with an agreement. It was ended by a battle where a lot of bitterness took place because they shelled and killed so many in the northern part of the country that up to now the bitterness remains. Nepal. Nepal has had two people's power experiences. And through people power, they also brought down a monarchy. And what was interesting, while we were working in Nepal, is that the most wanted leader or ideologue, among the Nepali Marxists was named Baburam Bhattarai. And do you know where our meeting took place? It was in the shadow of the royal palace. I was surprised because they were looking for him all over the place, but his home, or very modest place where he was hiding, was just under or in the shadow of the royal palace. And so discussing, what are the possibilities, what are the possible venues, paths to forge some kind of peace. And for them, it became a seven parties coming together after the monarchy fell and bringing forward this kind of agreement or coalition to forge the peace. And because I had been a member of the Philippine Constitutional Commission, they said to me, would you be willing to provide some assistance or advice or dialogue with the members of the Constituent Assembly? The Constituent Assembly in Nepal was then also drafting their own constitution. So for me, that was a humbling experience. Their Constituent Assembly consisted of 601 people with 30% women, which, before was unheard of, especially in Nepal. That's why I'm so excited about the book on Saturday, because it's about 6 Filipino women Right now in the Philippines, I have to tell you, the struggle is being led by women, brave women. And that's why it's about the 6 women. And so that was important, to see that kind of coalition taking place in Nepal. In Indonesia, I recall this line that, because I was there after the tsunami in 2005. And so after leaving Indonesia, after leaving Aceh, I said to myself, Aceh is the new name for hope. Because if you saw the devastation after the tsunami in Aceh in 2005, it destroyed so many homes. There was a huge ship, I remember, that was, what's the English word for it? Washed up. It was from the sea, it went to the shore. Huge. And I couldn't believe the power of the tsunami. And yet people were still, at the time there was armed conflict, but the tsunami brought them together and said, look, we have far more serious problems. We've got to get together. And that was what brought them together. At the same time, if you still remember, there was also the efforts of people from East Timor, Timor-Leste, to have an independent country, independent state. The Indonesian forces occupied Timor-Leste for a long time, but it was during this period also that the people of East Timor finally were able to articulate their independence, although they're a very small country. I understand Pope Francis, in his visit to Asia, in the coming months, is going to visit Timor-Leste, to show you how, this is considered a very important place, though it is very, very small. Now, going to the elusive quest for peace in Africa, I once entered a chapel in Kigali. There were a few soldiers guarding the gates, and I asked permission to enter. Would you believe in one chapel there were 365 dead bodies, in a chapel? I was told from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., with their machetes, the killings took place. That was really a bloody genocide. And, I said, at that time, right in front of the whole world, and we couldn't stop it, the genocide taking place. So I only know of 3, Cambodia, Rwanda, and probably Gaza. And so, this is really, for me, I can never forget the viciousness of the violence. So, International Alert, we had a team, especially working with women parliamentarians, and I was asked to speak before the Transitional National Assembly. Before the Transitional National Assembly in Rwanda. I cannot forget that setting. So I stood up, and this was after I had seen the killing fields, after I had seen the 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 names of people who were killed, I said, I have experienced loss once. We lost our son. We lost our eldest son. And it meant a world to us, you know. One son. So I said to them, I cannot imagine how you, who have lost families, villages, communities to this genocide, can still survive, you know. And so I realized, you know, all the things that the Rwandese were doing to preserve their soul, you know, to still come together. I also work in the neighboring country, Burundi. And in Burundi, it was a different case because the Commission for Justice and Peace, the bishops, they were trying to avoid what had taken place in their neighboring Rwanda. But the same mix, no? Hutus and Tutsis. And even among the Christians, there were tensions if you were a Hutu or Tutsi. But one of their greatest gifts was precisely to be able to hold it together in Burundi. Sierra Leone. I consider Sierra Leone, or my experience in Sierra Leone, my greatest failure. I don't know how many of you would know of the guerrilla leader, Revolutionary United Front, Foday Sanko. Does that name ring a bell? Foday Sanko of the RUF. Or maybe this rings a bell, Blood Diamonds. Have you heard of that phrase? Blood Diamonds? Because Sierra Leone was rich in minerals, and you know, the rebels had access to it also. And while we were working on the peace process in Sierra Leone, there was a coup. So you had military leaders, guerrillas, and then the civilian government who were sidelined. But, you know, it was that complex. However, in 1996, so we were 4 groups that were assisting in the mediation in this situation. You had the UN, you had the Commonwealth States, and you had the Organization of African Unity at that time, and International Alert. And I remember I was asked, because we were part of the mediating team, to say a few words at the signing of the agreement. And so I only had a few lines to say, but the most important line was this: now the harder part begins. The peace agreement collapsed because people were not able to hold the conflict parties to the agreements, especially regarding human rights, that they had signed to. And so for me, I said to myself, you know, sometimes, you know, maybe we have to respect the kairos. You know, the time was not ripe, maybe. The opportune moment had not arrived. You cannot force peace. But I consider that one of the most difficult, but yet for me important experiences, you know, Sierra Leone. South Africa. South Africa, Nelson Mandela was still under house arrest, I recall. And the International Alert Team, together with other organizations, were being asked to help to put together recommendations for a fair electoral system which would enable the ANC to be part of the electoral process in a fair manner. But it was the huge presence and the capacity for forgiveness of Nelson Mandela, who was detained or jailed in Robben Island for 27 years, and yet came out of that without bitterness in his heart. He had sent a delegation to meet up with business leaders from South Africa into Gore Island in Senegal. That's where the conversations took place. And without Nelson Mandela's huge presence, apartheid would not have been dismantled, And so sometimes you need this kind of larger-than-life figures who, able to transform history. Now, Colombia. I had in Colombia in 1980 to lead the Amnesty International delegation. This was the very first ever international alert, human rights. Now this was Amnesty International human rights investigation in Colombia, together with the psychiatrist Federico Allodi from Canada and Antonio Carretero Perez from Spain. We were three. So we came out with a report with all the cases of torture, arbitrary arrests, and killings in Colombia in 1980. And then in 1990s, we were back in Colombia, but for a different purpose. This was to assist the effort of the peace advocates in Colombia. And this, is where that, for me, that important lesson, was brought home to me. Meterle pueblo al proceso. Put people at the heart of the process. So, and that's what Colombia taught me, that, without the citizens taking a stand, gathering their strength, including the children, because there were Niños por la Paz. There was this children for peace, So, Colombia, and Latin America, in a sense, provided us this kind of lesson. So here also, one appreciates the role of competent and compassionate religious leaders in advancing peace efforts. You see, in many parts of Latin America, religious leaders have played a very passionate, compassionate role. Not just in Colombia. In El Salvador, do you remember the 6 Jesuit priests who were all in the Universidad Centroamericana, who were killed by the military, and because of their deaths, somehow the peace process with the Frente Farabundo Martí de Liberación Nacional, sat down with government and mediators to forge a peace in El Salvador, which for a long time, had a very, a civil war in its hands. And their religious leaders were very important. And in Nicaragua, the Cardenal brothers, Fernando and Ernesto Cardenal, were also quite important. to help the post-Somoza. If you remember, the Somoza dynasty ruled for 40 years in Nicaragua. And so, these efforts of religious leaders were very important. Colombia right now has had relative peace because not only did they forge a peace agreement with government and the Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia, but they had the Truth Commission, which was led by El Padre Francisco de Rue. He was the provincial of the Jesuits in Colombia, and he received 30,000 testimonies, and they received thousands of reports, and they put it all together so that they could bring back to the people the recommendations of the Truth Commission. And at the back, when the Truth Commission presented their report to the country, there was a big sign at the back: "Hay futuro si hay verdad." There is a future if there is truth. Veritas. So, that shows you how important it is, to be able to establish the truth, to be able to move forward, and to forge the peace that is just and that is lasting. In Latin America, I also learned the art of recognizing and respecting coyuntura. This is a Spanish word that is very difficult to translate because in English you would say conjuncture, but coyuntura is something, it's conjuncture plus, coyuntura, when the stars align, when the stars align, and then that is a moment that is ripe for doing something. The Greeks would say kairos, which is translated as a moment of grace or the opportune moment. And then finally, a humbling realization. Learning to live with unanswered questions. As we come to grips with the reality of Israel and Palestine, and I know this is a very difficult topic, I think the president of Columbia University is right now in the House of Representatives, testifying on anti-Semitism. But, let me tell you, thrice we attempted to do some work in the region. So I was part of a team that engaged in dialogue with the human rights activists from both sides of the divide. So we met at the Minerva Law Center at the University of Jerusalem. And, I could sense the burden of the human rights defenders in the room. And why? The Israelis were saying, we get more flack from fellow Israelis because for them, they have already demonized the other side, So in other words, it's very difficult, to be able to take a stand that the great majority would probably not agree with. I also worked with the Truman Peace Institute with Eddie Kaufman and the Palestinian ambassador to the UK. And again, the same thing, you know. They can work together, but it's very difficult to spread the word and get accepted. Finally, the former Secretary General of Amnesty International, Pierre Sané, you know, invited me to be part of the UNESCO peace efforts. So we tried all kinds, you know, at different levels, you know, inviting leaders from different parts of the globe, Muslim and Jewish, inviting citizens groups to dialogue. But we always faced a blank wall. And even now, you know, as I said, it's a humbling realization that we learn to live with unanswered questions. I sent James, I did on October 12, 2023, just after the October 7 events. If you recall, I sent you my, you know, I did a statement hoping to gather, following the UN declaration of trying to stop the cycle of bloodshed in the region. And you know, it's now how many months since October? 6 months, and we are still not quite there yet. In the meantime, children, women, elderly, you know, I can't imagine how people are able to survive with the intense bombing, with the lack of food and water and shelter. So, and it's happening right, you know, before our eyes, and we all seem to be helpless. Even the UN, no, is not able to. So, those are the kind of situations we find ourselves in. Now, in the Philippines, together with peace advocates in the country, as I said, almost 45 years or so, we've been at it, you know, since the 1980s. You know, especially after the downfall of the dictatorship, one of the first, you know, I recall one of the first conversations with Cory Aquino was, how do we move the peace process forward? But still, that's why the marathon mentality is important, because, you know, as I said, we still have the world's longest armed conflict involving communists. And it's really a wonder why we have been unable to break that Gordian knot. Of course, in Muslim Mindanao, thanks to the peace agreement that was forged regarding Bangsamoro, Mindanao, there is that space right now for bringing about, for advancing the causes of our brothers and sisters who are Muslims in the southern part of the country. So again, the capacity to organize and mobilize is important. Oh, you know, here, do you remember, you know, Corazon Aquino, the first post-dictatorship government, faced armed challenges from the CPP, NDF, NPA, from the MILF, and then from the recalcitrant members of the military. There were at least 7 coup attempts against the duly designated president. And so I was part of a movement at that time, around the late 80s, probably very few of you would remember kilos. What does kilos mean? Act, move. And we formed kilos because we wanted to be able to confront the coup d'etats. So I asked myself, and in fact the question is, where in the world do you form a movement against coup d'etat attempts? And so this is my answer. In a place where coup attempts can be publicly announced and at times publicly postponed. You know, we lived through a time when it was such a farce. You know, I mean, Gringo Onasan and other members of the RAM, Reform Armed Forces Movement, would announce, you know, a coup is coming, and they say, wait, we postpone it. And as I said, that's so I said to myself, ibang klase talaga ang Pilipinas. Kaya may kilos, you know, that's why we have kilos, because, you know, does anybody know of any other movement against coup d'etats anywhere else? Are there examples? Would you? Well, we had one in the Philippines. So, sorry? Can you speak louder so we can hear you?
The resolution of the negotiation allow for something else to enter in. Throws everything off.
That's right. Yeah, you're right. You know, it's yeah, everything. I like that word that you use, the off kilter, or the process gets you know, completely muddled up. You know, and that's the reason why I'm saying to you that to sustain the peace efforts, you know, you require citizens' engagement, the involvement of citizens, because it's about their lives. And so what did we have in that period, the 1990s and so on later and later on was we had citizens' peace missions. One of the and the multi-sectoral peace advocates. One of the key people here was the former Senator Bobby Tañada. You know, he was well respected by all sides, and I'll explain later on. You know, the different efforts, but to have a multi-sectoral peace advocate was important. Then we also had the National Peace Conference, which was about the peace agenda. So what would be the most important policy recommendations to have a lasting peace? And the Coalition for Peace, which was the creation of peace zones, around the country. And the Secretary General of this emergent Coalition for Peace was none other than Risa Hontiveros. And now she's a lone opposition senator in the Senate, but she began in the Coalition for Peace. Now, I wanted to say a few words about, you know, third-party facilitators. So you have two kinds normally. One is outsiders neutral, and the other is insiders partial. So to give an example, the outsiders neutral would be like the peace mediators from Norway, you know, because in the Philippines, the Norwegians play a very important role. They are outsiders, and they're supposed to be neutral above the fray. And the insiders partial means that you may have a group of citizens who may be linked to one or the other of the parties to the conflict, but because they're together, they also you know, gain credibility. And together, when they work, outsiders neutral, insiders partial, then you carry some weight, and you're able to advance the efforts, which, could have easily collapsed. But this is quite important. No? Third-party facilitators. Without this, even in Colombia, you had the Norwegians. Jan Egeland, for example, was in Burundi. The special envoy was Jean Arnaud. So you have different mediators in different parts of the world where conflicts take place. So I summarized earlier, the lessons learned. So let me give you the four clusters. The four clusters. The first one is putting people at the heart of the process. And this means, and the second one is owning the process to embrace the outcome. The third one is restoring broken relationships. The fourth one is realizing peace agreements are points of departure, not final destinations. So let's start with the people. Why is it important that they are involved? Because those who live through the conflict can offer valuable insights and propose ways forward. They live through the conflict, and therefore their thoughts, their suggestions, can be very valuable. So listen, we have to listen. The other one is we have to demonstrate what in Colombia is called hechos de paz, deeds of peace. To heal the wounds of war, you have to have deeds of peace, improve people's lives and their safety. When I was working with International Alert, I remember one of the key, when we did the code of conduct for conflict transformation work, linking peace efforts with human rights compliance was very critical. Because you can't say we advocate peace and yet on the ground a lot of human rights abuses take place. It just won't work. It won't fly. And then avoid shortcuts to nowhere, unresolved issues, historic grievances, real or imagined, cannot be ignored. Patience and persistence are essential ingredients in the brew. Those 3 points, actually, there are, examples. There are examples where the Palestine-Israeli issue is precisely very important here. There are unresolved issues, historic grievances, whether real or imagined. You cannot ignore them. That's the reason why patience and persistence are so critical. And owning the process, it is the key to sustainability, because sacrifices are required in the long run, but they will only be able to make the sacrifices if they trust the process. And then exclusion. Very often, it's the inability to address the poverty of the population, the inequality, and the politics of exclusion that is at the heart of much of the conflicts that we find ourselves in, that countries find themselves in. And then, as I said earlier, we have to transform risks into opportunities. Actually, Monday night we had supper together, and one of the students who was with us said, "Preparedness meets opportunity." I was so pleasantly surprised because that's one of the things that I have always believed in, is that, Kairos, no, it doesn't happen by accident, no. You have to be prepared, so that when the opportunity comes, you're ready to welcome it. Yeah. So that's interesting. Actually, there's a film, Serendipity, and it's fairly similar to being prepared. If your heart is open, when the opportunity comes around, then you're ready. Restoring broken relationships. As I said earlier, peace is about relationships, especially between communities that have been, you build up so much resentment over time because you think the Hutus or you think the Tutsis have all the privileges and your community is marginalized. In Filipino, we have a word for it. Akala nyo dehado kayo. Dehado. So therefore, you're not ready. The relationships suffer. So the importance of bridging differences to reconcile people. The first casualty, in a conflict, very often is truth and trust. People are not able to convey the truth because it's always filtered. It's always filtered. You're unable to distinguish fact from fiction. In fact, on Friday, in our last session, I will start off with the insights of Gabriel Garcia Marquez regarding Macondo and distinguishing fact from fiction. But this is one of the important kind of issues related to that. So it's very hard to communicate with those who are distant or different when the conflict situation prevails. And then transform power relations. A very good example of this is what? Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland. A different way of doing politics. Principles and moral courage. In Northern Ireland, for a long time, the Troubles, they call it the Troubles, simply, divided community. If you go to Belfast, you will see on the sidewalks, this side is Catholic, the other side is Protestant, and that divide, has always created a lot of vindictiveness, a lot of even hatred. And so, unless power relations, are reconfigured, then things won't change. And one of the things that the Good Friday Agreement in Belfast, in Northern Ireland, what it accomplished was precisely that, there is now kind of a different correlation of power. So, importance of mindset and social change. So in other words, it's not just an agreement, it's also mindsets and social structures. That's why it's very difficult, forging a lasting peace, a just and lasting peace. Now we go to the last part, which is that peace agreements are points of departure. They are not final destinations. Once you have an agreement, you haven't arrived. you're just, you just have to begin again, on a different plane, on a different level. So they're not final destinations. There's no guarantee of overnight change, only opportunities for more work. That for me is brought home by the Bangsamoro in Mindanao. So Mindanao, there's so much work that needs to be done. It's still the poorest region in the country. So, education-wise, health-wise, so there's a lot of work to be done. And so, as I said earlier, when the ink dries, the harder part begins. Final thoughts. Peacemaking requires the stamina and mentality of a marathon runner, the perseverance of a job, the boldness of a prophet, and then hope to build a country without war despite difficulties and the burdens of history. Hope that believes in finding meaning in one's work and one's life. That is taken from anybody? Václav Havel, the Czechoslovakian, Czech leader. Hope, is finding meaning in one's work and one's life. We cannot be discouraged nor deterred, nor feel disheartened for the tasks await. We have to overcome the fears of the past, forge character, combining conscience and courage. The work to bring about a just peace never seems to end. That is something that, one comes to realize even at the end of one's life. It's always unfinished journeys. Actually, for me, the most graphic, relevant, Simon Bolivar, when he was trying to put together the Andean countries. In fact, he had a dream of putting Latin America together like the United States of America. He wanted the Latin American configuration. But at the end of the day, he failed. And so he compared the work. He said, the work for liberation, because he was the libertador, Simon Bolivar. It is like plowing the seas. And that's a very powerful image because obviously it can't be done. And that is how he compared the end of his lifetime's work, that it was like plowing the seas. And then here, as I said, I will end with a failure. This for me is, we faltered and failed. And as I said, it's important to remember one's failures because sometimes that's a better teacher than victory. The harder part begins. So the peace broke down, in Sierra Leone, but the tasks remain. And that's why I always do what is possible. Hope is the passion for the possible. Thank you very much.
We have a few minutes to take some questions too, if you're okay with.
Yes, please. Yeah.
So one thing I was thinking about when you were speaking. So today, last time you gave this opening. I should turn on my
Mike.
I'm listening to the. The last time you were speaking about how these different movements that are taking place around the globe are influencing each other, and you also had then how the movement that takes off in the Philippines then had ramifications in other countries as well. And then today you gave us a kind of a tour of your own life and work in different countries and Latin America, Africa. And so during that time, ostensibly you're learning a lot from those experiences and bringing something back to the work you're thinking about in the Philippines. During that time, how did you stay up on what's happening in the Philippines while you were away, and who were you in contact with, and how was the flow of information happening at that point, and what kinds of things were some of these lessons brought home that were applied in the Philippines?
Well, very briefly, I would, every month, I would travel to Utrecht in the Netherlands. Do you know why? The negotiating panel of the NDF were based there. Joe Masison, Fidel Agkawili, Louis Halandoni, Juliet de Lima. So in other words, we met with the NDF, the National Democratic Front, and I would travel to the Philippines to meet with Ging Deles, for example, who was the peace commissioner, and the other members of the commission, Bebot Bello, Chito Gascon, and others. So that's number one. Number two is, in this day and age, we have the email, we have the Viber. So it is quite important to be in touch always, to communicate, and so fortunately we have this facility. Unlike, remember, I was telling you earlier, during the People's Power experience, we didn't have access to social media. We didn't have access to iPhones. So it was by word of mouth and by a small radio station, which was an offshoot to Radio Veritas. Does anybody remember Radio Bandido? Radio Bandido was a very small outfit which Father James Reuter put together, as a breakaway from Radio Veritas. And all of us were listening during the People's Power experience to transistor radios. Do you still remember transistor radios? Everybody, I remember in the streets during the 4 days, February 22 to February 25, 1986, everybody had a small transistor radio because we were getting our news from the transistor radio. So, communication is very important. Yeah. Let's have a round of questions, and then I'll try to respond.
Yeah. Please, and then if you can use the mic when it comes, that'd be great.
Professor Ed,
Yes.
I was wondering, you said why even the early years of Marcos, he was trying to negotiate with the MILF in Mindanao. How come that problem still exists, that the conflict among the MILF and the government is still unresolved? What's your thought, the reason why?
Okay. Let's make a round so that I will just answer once. Who else wants to ask a question?
Oh, wow. Such a great talk. Actually, I don't really expect that I can learn so much from this talk. And my question is, thank you so much for reviewing your own life and from so many activities. Actually, it gave me so many different materials to imagine what kind of life you have go through from this experience. And somewhat, actually, I'm not sure because I'm not working in this particular field. I'm not sure in my life, actually, I can experience most of the things. But I just want to ask, if you look back, maybe 30 or 40 years ago, when you choose your career and you around that time, you would like to do something related to the international relations or political stuff. When you look back, is there anything you learn from your? I mean, this from this period of time. Is there any something you don't?
Is there any?
Is there any something you don't really expect you will learn from this sort of experience? I mean, just like my question is that when you were young, you decide to pursue this career, right? But after this sort of experience, now you learned quite a lot, so you share us today. But is there anything in particular actually you have learned, but before you don't really expect you could pick up this lesson?
Okay.
Is there anything you find very special? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You want to start with those two, Ed, and then
All right.
we'll see if it.
I'd like to ask one more, or at least so that we can close. Anyone else? Yes, please.
Yeah, get it.
There.
Yes, thank you, Professor Ed, for this really reflection of your life. And with so many countries, it's a very unique experience that you bring in terms of having seen the Philippines up close, but also all of these different sites. So I wonder if you can add, when you respond to these questions, I wonder if you can add a reflection on the role of culture and religion,
Sorry, on.
like cultural differences in terms of how it figures in this piece, in this marathon that you mentioned. What's the role of culture and also religion, given that many of these conflicts have a lot of religious context around them? Thank you.
And if I can throw in to add on to that, Ed, also about your role as your religious training as a Jesuit and
Okay.
as a seminarian
All right.
is also interesting part of this. Yeah. One more question, it looks like.
Too. My question is about the American role in the peace process in the Philippines, because they had a vested interest in the outcome.
All right. Shall I try to respond?
Please.
First of all, I really am very grateful to all of you for coming. It is so gratifying to know that there is interest, and I'm grateful for your presence. In Mindanao, I understand that many of the conflicts that take place is not only because of the armed conflict between the government and the liberation fronts, but there is something called RIDO. Are you familiar with RIDO? RIDO is the conflict regarding land, the conflict among the people that is passed from family to family, communities, and generations. So that is actually, one of the findings of International Alert in Mindanao is that there is more impact of RIDO regarding the violence in the regions. Now, secondly, I want to say that the Bangsamoro kind of government that is now in place obviously has helped with the greater peace and stability in the region. So there is, and I would like to thank the negotiators, especially Miriam Coronel and Ging Deles. Both of them worked very hard together with the negotiators from the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, and so we have this kind of development. Now, regarding your very difficult question, I will answer you with a song. Caminante no hay camino, se hace camino al andar. Caminante no hay camino, se hace camino al andar. Antonio Machado the Spanish poet, wrote these verses, and it was sung by Juan Manuel Serrat, Catalan. And what do the words mean? Walking, there is no path. You create the path along the way. I did not plan. When I studied in the seminary, as you said, in the seminary, I did philosophy, theology, humanities, and then later on political science in Mexico, etc. I did not envision this kind of life. I didn't plan it. When the political science department of the University of the Philippines seconded me to International Alert, it was for only 2 years. And you ask my wife, she's there. It was 2 years that became 20. In fact, I said, we were debating, let's just rent. It's only 2 years. But my wife insisted, sayang. You said, no, if you rent, sayang, you have to buy, because otherwise you're wasting so much money. And I never thought it would last for 20 years. Well, you ask the director here how long. When you plan your life, of course you prepare. When I realized I was so deficient, when I realized I was so unprepared, I decided to study social sciences, ciencias sociales in Mexico. And then I studied ciencias políticas. Then I did peace studies. So, I was studying until I was around 30 plus. Then I studied languages. In other words, there's a lot of preparation going on. But to be really prepared for the kind of work you do, then that's as I said, caminante no hay camino. Se hace camino al andar. You make the path while you're walking. Which brings me to the question of culture. Precisely, there was a forum at the Chatham House. The Chatham House in London. Mm-hmm. That's where they have these gatherings. And one of the question that I was supposed to address in this forum, composed of many peace kind of practitioners, was, what is it in Filipino culture that contributes something unique to the peace work that you do? That was the question. Is there something about Filipino culture? And so, I actually, I have the answer written actually in my draft memoir. But let me start with this. First of all, I said I come from a country that socio-politically or geopolitically has not much weight, not much influence. But because of the nature of the work of our people, the nurses and the doctors who make the hospitals in the UK, in Ireland, and other parts of the globe work, because of the technicians, because of the teachers, the Filipino diaspora is very rich, and that's something that I feel being Filipino allows us. Every part of the world where I have been to, even Khartoum in Sudan, would you believe? One time I was in Sudan. It was so dusty. I don't know if you've ever been to, what's the capital of Sudan? Khartoum.
Khartoum. Yeah.
So I was seated there for breakfast, and here comes this huge, pomelo juice. Then it was placed on my table. Then the girl said, the lady who served me says, dahil Pilipino po kayo, para sa inyo ito. In other words, everywhere you go, there Filipinos are there, and so I said that this is the diaspora of Filipinos' presence. Number two, the fact that we are, we have it in our DNA. People power is part of our DNA. You know, we rise or fall. No, we have had people power. People power 1, people power 2. I don't know if you're familiar with people power 3, but I will discuss that on Friday. Because there is a failed people power experience. And so that is an important kind of experience or cultural heritage. The third is that we have, and this goes back to that question also, of, we have a history of being dominated by U.S. foreign policy. And that's why when we were drafting the Constitution, I recall, I was a sponsor of the provisions terminating, the U.S. military bases in the Philippines because they would neither confirm nor deny the presence of nuclear weapons. 1. And number 2, for so long, U.S. foreign policy supported governments, including dictatorships of the Marcoses, because of the presence of military bases. In other words, there was a linkage. Unless we were able to free ourselves of this kind of dominance, obviously, we were not really going to be able to sing our own song. We're not going to be able to march to the beat of our own drums. Right now, obviously, there is a different situation in the West Philippine Sea. You have China bullying countries, and obviously the U.S. is emerging as another power, as a kind of a protector. But then we have to be careful. We have to be able to navigate, our foreign policy to be independent, because there are no permanent friends and no permanent enemies. We've got to say, if nobody watches out for Filipino national interests, if we Filipinos are unable to kind of make sure that our interests prevail, then nobody else will. And that's the reason why I think when as a Filipino peacemaker, these are the kind of experiences I felt which comes into the fray. And then to end, for a long time I was a seminarian. And I was a Jesuit scholastic. I was a Jesuit regent. How many of you were here last night to watch Delicado? How many of you have seen Delicado? Did you remember? Delicado is an Emmy-nominated film. It's really an excellent film. Too bad you missed it, but you can still watch it. And attorney Bobby Chan.
Bobby Chan, yeah.
Okay, he spoke. And his life was at risk because of the nature of his work, defending the forest, the waters. And then he said, I studied at the Ateneo, and the Jesuit fathers who formed me always reminded us to be men for others. Now it's person for others. And in a sense, that also, I guess, is part of what has formed my own thinking, my work. In fact, there is a Latin word which we learn in school, and this word is magis. Does anybody know magis? Magis means more. To be more, to do more in the areas where it matters. And somehow, as a student, as a young boy studying through school, this influenced my thinking, my commitment. So somehow, I guess wherever I go, that's part of the, part of the makeup, the mindset that I bring to the work. Now, I think I've answered all of the questions. Did I miss any question?
I think you got it. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I think why
Yes. Yes, sir. All right. So I say to you, tuloy ang laban. Tuloy ang laban. The struggle continues. Salamat po. Salamat. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I wish we could entice more undergraduates here, because I think the story you told today goes against so much of what young people today, how they live their lives. I meet so many undergraduate students, they come here and they have a 5-year plan, you know, or even maybe longer, maybe a 25-year plan, and they think they're going to build up to that, and they've lost all the serendipity, the kairos that comes with how one builds a life in a way that is maybe what you were asking, kind of unplanned in this sense. You can set goals, of course, but how do you keep yourself open to make changes and to adapt and to build up a life that's meaningful, instead of chasing something where that path isn't always even something you remember or you even feel proud of at a point too. So how to I think it's a different world. Maybe well, I'm counting us. I'm bald, so we could be a same generation. But then the young generation now, who there are other. I realize there's different pressures in life, and it's a different world that they live in. But there's something about that openness to walking a path that you're creating along the same way that is different than planning out every step ahead of the time. So. Anyway, I think that was a good lesson today of showing how that builds up, not just to make a chronicle of those experiences, but they all add up to a life, which is your life. And it's a fascinating one. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you very much.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. So we have, tomorrow is a rest day, let's say. No film. We'll let Professor Garcia get charged up, and please join us on Friday for the final lecture, and then also on Saturday if you can make it back. I think that'll be a real nice way to culminate things as well. So, and we have copies of the book if people would like on that day as well. So again, thank you very much for coming, and we'll see you hopefully later this week.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Ed.